when my nephew, Trevor, assured me with his salesman smile that my sister's bounced check was just a simple bank error. I nodded and pretended to believe him. He thought he was dealing with a retired old man, easily confused by the complexities of modern banking. What he failed to remember was that I spent 40 years as a forensic accountant for the IRS. My entire career was built on the simple truth that numbers do not lie, but people do. He thought he was covering his tracks, but he was just leaving a clean, clear trail of evidence that I was about to follow all the way to his ruin. Before I get into the details of the audit I conducted, please subscribe to the channel and share a comment if you believe financial literacy is a critical skill for all ages. My name is Henry Clark, and I am 76 years old. I live a quiet, orderly life in a small house in Denver, Colorado. My days are structured and predictable, a habit from a long career spent finding order in the chaos of financial deception. I balance my checkbook to the penny. I file my taxes the day I receive my forms, and my greatest pleasure is the quiet logic of a well-tended garden. My world is one of numbers, patterns, and consequences. My younger sister, Miriam, is my only living relative. At 71, she is a gentle soul, a former kindergarten teacher who spent her life nurturing others. A few years ago, she was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. The diagnosis was a cruel thief, slowly stealing the vibrant, sharp woman she had been and leaving behind a growing confusion and vulnerability. Her memory would come and go, with moments of perfect clarity followed by periods of frustrating fog. We knew the day was coming when she would no longer be able to manage her own affairs. That day arrived 6 months ago. The conversation happened at Miriam's kitchen table. Her son, my nephew Trevor, had flown in from out of state. Trevor is 45, a man who has always possessed more charm than character. He has a history of failed business ventures and a lifestyle that always seemed to exceed his income. He presented himself as the devoted son, his voice thick with concern. "Mom needs someone to look after her," he said, placing his hand over hers. "Someone she trusts. I want to be that person. I will take care of everything, the bills, the appointments. I will be her power of attorney." There was a moment of hesitation. I felt a small, instinctive flicker of unease, the same feeling I used to get when a tax return looked just a little too perfect. But Miriam, in a moment of lucidity, looked at her son with such love and trust. "Oh, Trevor," she said, her eyes welling up, "would you really do that for me?" To argue against it would have been cruel, undermining the wishes of my sister and casting suspicion on her only child. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The legal papers were drawn up, and Trevor was officially granted power of attorney over Miriam's finances and health care. At first, things seemed to be going well. Trevor called with regular updates, his voice always cheerful and reassuring. I continued my long-standing habit of visiting Miriam every Tuesday to help her sort her mail and pay the few small bills that still came in her name. The first red flag appeared about 2 months in. It was a notice from my sister's supplemental insurance company. Her monthly premium check had been returned for insufficient funds. It was a small amount, just over $100, but it was impossible. I knew for a fact that Miriam had more than enough in her checking account to cover it. I called Trevor. He was smooth and dismissive. "Oh, that," he said with a casual laugh. "Uncle Henry, do not worry. It was a bank error. I was moving some of her money into a higher yield savings account, and the transfer did not clear in time. It is all sorted out. I paid it online." It sounded plausible, and I let it go. But a forensic accountant never really retires. That small, illogical detail, a bounced check from a healthy account, was a loose thread. And I have learned that if you pull on a loose thread, you will eventually unravel the entire garment. A single bounced check was an anomaly, but my training had taught me that anomalies are often the first sign of a systemic failure. I did not challenge Trevor further on the phone. Instead, I decided to observe. I became a quiet auditor of my sister's life, looking for more data points that did not fit the pattern of a well-managed estate. The following Tuesday, during my visit, I found another one. A bright orange envelope was mixed in with the junk mail on Miriam's counter. It was a second, more urgent notice from her homeowners association, stating that her quarterly dues were now 60 days overdue and that late fees were accruing. I looked at the date on the notice. The payment had been due weeks before the supposed bank error Trevor had described. The two events were unrelated, which meant this was not a single mistake. It was a pattern of mismanagement. When I asked Miriam about it, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Trevor takes care of that," she said, her voice uncertain. "He told me not to worry about the mail anymore." Later, while we were watching television, she tried to turn to her favorite gardening channel, but the screen was blank. "Oh," she said with a sigh of disappointment. "That has not been working for a few weeks. Trevor said he was going to call the cable company. He was not just mismanaging her finances. He was cutting off her small, daily comforts, the simple pleasures that structured her world." I called Trevor that evening. I kept my tone inquisitive, not accusatory. I mentioned the HOA notice and the cable being disconnected. His voice was a smooth balm of practiced reassurance, but this time I could hear the irritation underneath it. "Uncle Henry, with all due respect, you have to let me handle this," he said, a note of condescension in his voice. "I am consolidating all her bills into an online payment system to make it more efficient. There are always a few hiccups when you make a transition like that. The old way of doing things, with paper checks and stamps, is just not secure anymore." He was using the language of modernization to deflect, to make me feel like the outdated old man who did not understand the new digital world. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that moved my suspicion from mismanagement to active theft, came a week later. Trevor called me, his voice buzzing with a manufactured excitement. "Great news," he announced. "I was able to move some of Mom's idle cash into a fantastic investment. It is a new tech startup, a sure thing. I am going to double her money in a year." A cold dread settled in my stomach. A financial manager for a 71-year-old woman with dementia does not invest her life savings in a high-risk tech startup. They invest in stable, low-yield bonds. They preserve capital. They do not gamble with it. It was a lie, and it was a lie designed to explain a large, missing sum of money. I knew then that I had to see the bank statements. Arguing with Trevor was pointless. He was a wall of smooth excuses and condescending lies. I needed to go around him. The following Tuesday, I found Miriam having one of her good days. She was lucid, her memory was sharp, and the fog of her condition had temporarily lifted. We sat in her garden, and I spoke to her, my voice gentle but direct. "Miriam," I began, "I am a little worried about your finances. There have been a few late bills, and I just want to make sure everything is in perfect order for you. I am an old accountant, and it would give me peace of mind to just look over the bank statements." I saw a flicker of her own worry in her eyes. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I do not want to alarm you," I said truthfully. "I just want to double-check. Trevor is a good boy, but this is a lot for him to handle. Would you be willing to sign a form that gives me permission to view your bank accounts online? It would let me be a second set of eyes for you." Her relief was immediate. "Oh, Henry, would you?" she said, squeezing my hand. "I would feel so much better knowing you are looking at it. I trust you with everything." That afternoon, we went to her bank. The form was simple, and with her clear and willing signature, I was granted view-only access to all of her accounts. The bank manager, who had known our family for years, looked at me with a knowing sadness. He knew what this likely meant. That evening, I sat down at the desk in my study, the same desk where I had unraveled the complex financial lies of seasoned criminals for 40 years. I typed in Miriam's account number and the temporary password. The screen loaded, and for the first time, I had a clear, unobstructed view of my sister's financial world. I was no longer a concerned brother. I was a forensic accountant, and the audit had officially begun. The moment the online banking portal loaded, the slick, reassuring narrative Trevor had been selling me evaporated. I was staring at a crime scene, a digital ledger of my own nephew's systematic betrayal of his mother. The immediate consequence of seeing those numbers was a cold, quiet fury that settled deep in my bones. It was the familiar, professional anger I used to feel when I saw a charity's funds embezzled or a small business destroyed by a crook partner. But this was worse. This was not a stranger's crime. It was a wound inflicted from within the family. Miriam's checking account, which should have had a comfortable cushion of several $1,000s, was nearly empty. Her savings account, which had held the bulk of her life savings, over $150,000 meticulously saved over 50 years, was a ghost of its former self. Less than $20,000 remained. The rest was gone, vanished in just 6 months. The betrayal was not just in the theft, it was in the brazen, almost arrogant, pattern of the withdrawals. I started at the beginning, the week after Trevor had been granted power of attorney. The first withdrawals were small, almost plausible. A $500 ATL here, a $1,000 online transfer there. He was testing the waters. When no one noticed, he grew bolder. The transfers became larger and more frequent. $5,000 moved to an investment account I did not recognize. $10,000 transferred directly into an account under his own name, brazenly labeled loan repayment in the memo line, a loan Miriam had never made. I opened the statements for the brokerage account he had mentioned, the one holding the fantastic investment. It was not a tech startup. It was a high-risk day trading account, and it was a bloodbath. He had been gambling with her money, making a series of reckless, idiotic bets on volatile stocks. He had lost over $30,000 in a matter of weeks, treating her retirement fund like his personal slot machine. The most sickening discovery was the credit card statements. He had added himself as an authorized user to Miriam's primary credit card. The list of charges was a sickening chronicle of a selfish, extravagant lifestyle. There were charges for $500 dinners at fancy steakhouses, a $2,000 payment for a luxury car lease, and a staggering $6,000 charge for an all-inclusive resort vacation in Mexico. He had been living like a king on the dwindling resources of his own mother, a woman whose cable television he had allowed to be disconnected to save a few dollars. He was not just stealing from her future, he was stealing from her present, stripping away her small comforts to fund his own lavish indulgences. The full weight of the situation crashed down on me. My gentle sister, in the twilight of her life, was being financially bled dry by her only child. He was not a son caring for his mother. He was a parasite, draining his host with a chilling lack of remorse. Her vulnerability was not a reason for him to protect her. It was an opportunity for him to plunder. I thought of the bounced insurance check and the late HOA fees. They were not mistakes. They were the inevitable consequences of a man who was so focused on large-scale theft that he could not be bothered with the small-scale responsibilities of actual caregiving. He was not just a bad son. He was an incompetent one. For the next 3 days, I did not sleep. I sat at my desk, fueled by black coffee and a righteous anger. I became the man I used to be, the IRS agent on the hunt. I downloaded every bank statement, every credit card bill, every brokerage report. I created a master spreadsheet, a forensic ledger of the betrayal. I traced every single dollar that had left Miriam's accounts since Trevor took control. I color-coded the transactions. Red for direct theft, orange for fraudulent investments, yellow for personal expenses. The final document was a horrifyingly beautiful piece of accounting, a perfect, undeniable timeline of greed and deception. It was a weapon, forged from the cold, hard language of numbers. The emotional toll was immense. With every new entry on the spreadsheet, I felt a fresh wave of disgust. This was my nephew, the little boy I had taught to ride a bike, the young man I had given career advice to. That person was gone, replaced by a common thief. The betrayal was complete. He had abused my trust, his mother's love, and the legal power that was meant to be her shield. I now had the proof. The quiet phase of my investigation was over. It was time to move from auditing to action. With the forensic ledger complete, a damning, multi-page document detailing over $130,000 in theft, I made a conscious and irrevocable decision. I would not confront Trevor. A confrontation would only result in a storm of lies, empty promises to pay the money back, and a desperate attempt to manipulate his mother. He had proven he was incapable of shame or remorse. My objective was not to appeal to his conscience, because he did not have one. My objective was to legally and systematically strip him of his power and hold him accountable for his actions. My first step was to seek professional legal counsel. My years at the IRS had taught me that a solid case is built on both undeniable evidence and expert legal strategy. I researched and found a law firm in downtown Denver that specialized in elder law and probate litigation. I made an appointment with a lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. She was a woman in her 50s with a reputation for being a fierce and compassionate advocate for vulnerable seniors. I walked into her office with a single, neatly organized binder. "My nephew is stealing from my sister," I said without preamble, "and I have the receipts." I spent the next hour walking her through the spreadsheet I had created. I showed her the transfers, the credit card statements, and the brokerage account losses. I did not speak with the emotion of a grieving brother, but with the cold, factual precision of an expert witness. I watched her expression shift from professional interest to controlled fury. She had seen cases like this before, but the clarity and detail of my evidence were clearly on another level. "Mr. Clark," she said when I had finished, her voice firm, "this is one of the most well-documented cases of financial elder abuse I have ever seen. We are going to take immediate action." Our first move, she explained, was to petition the probate court for an emergency temporary guardianship over my sister. This was a critical step. If granted, it would immediately suspend Trevor's power of attorney, cutting off his access to Miriam's accounts and preventing him from doing any further damage. To support the petition, we needed a medical evaluation of Miriam. This was the most delicate part of the plan. I had to get a doctor to assess her mental state without alerting Trevor and giving him a chance to interfere. I scheduled Miriam's annual checkup with her longtime family doctor, a man I knew and trusted. During a lucid moment, I explained the situation to my sister in the simplest terms. "Miriam," I said gently, "I am worried that Trevor is having trouble with the finances. I need you to let Dr. Evans know that you want me to help handle things for you." She agreed, her trust in me absolute. At the appointment, Dr. Evans performed a cognitive assessment. His final report was clear. Miriam was not capable of managing her own financial affairs and was highly susceptible to undue influence. He formally recommended that a legal guardian be appointed to protect her interests. With my forensic ledger, the doctor's report, and a sworn affidavit from me, Sarah Jenkins filed the emergency petition with the court. The next phase of our plan was to lay the groundwork for a civil recovery lawsuit. Sarah's team began preparing the case, using my spreadsheet as the primary evidence, to sue Trevor for the full amount he had stolen, plus legal fees and punitive damages. The goal was not just to stop him, but to claw back every penny he had taken. We were testing his defenses before he even knew he was under attack. We knew he would receive a notice of the guardianship hearing, and we anticipated his reaction perfectly. He would see it as an act of aggression from a meddling old uncle, an attempt to usurp his rightful place. He would walk into that courtroom arrogant and unprepared, armed with nothing but his own self-serving lies. He had no idea he was walking into a meticulously planned legal ambush. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. During that time, I visited Miriam every day, creating a cocoon of normalcy around her. I did not speak of the court case or her son's betrayal. I just spent time with her, watching old movies and talking about her garden. I was protecting her from the ugly truth of her son's actions, a truth she would never have to confront directly. My fight was to ensure that the rest of her life would be lived in peace and security, free from the predator who shared her blood. This was the quiet before the storm, the final, methodical preparation before the execution of a plan that would bring my nephew's world of deceit crashing down around him. Before we go on, please hit the like button. It really is a huge help to the channel. My nephew thought his crimes were invisible, but he was about to see them displayed for a judge to see. The execution of the plan unfolded in a sterile, third-floor courtroom at the Denver Probate Court. The air was thick with the quiet, tense energy of families in conflict. I sat beside my lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, my binder of evidence resting on the table in front of me. I felt a grim, focused calm. I was not here as a grieving brother. I was here as an instrument of consequence. Trevor arrived a few minutes late, a deliberate power move, looking confident and unruffled in a suit that I was certain had been purchased with his mother's money. He was representing himself, the ultimate act of a narcissist who believes his own charm is a match for the rule of law. He gave me a look of condescending pity, the look of a man who truly believed he was about to swat away a nuisance. The hearing began. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Judge Ann Holloway, reviewed the initial petition. "Mr. Clark," she said, addressing my nephew, "your uncle has filed for an emergency guardianship of your mother, Miriam Clark, citing concerns of financial mismanagement under your power of attorney. What is your response?" Trevor stood, his voice smooth and earnest, the performance of a lifetime. "Your Honor," he began, "I love my mother more than anything. I gave up my life and career to care for her. My Uncle Henry, with all due respect, is a retired man with too much time on his hands. He has always been a bit controlling, and he simply does not understand modern financial strategies. He sees a necessary transfer of funds into a growth-oriented portfolio and thinks it is theft. He painted a picture of me as a relic, an old man who could not comprehend the brilliant moves he was making to secure his mother's future. Every penny has been accounted for and is being used to grow her nest egg." He lied, his gaze unwavering. "This petition is a misguided and hurtful attempt to interfere in a loving family relationship." His performance was good. He was plausible, charming, and he had successfully framed this as a simple family disagreement. I could see the judge considering his words, her expression neutral. This was the moment. "Miss Jenkins," the judge said, "your client has made some very serious accusations. Do you have any evidence to support them, or is this, as your nephew suggests, a misunderstanding?" "We do, Your Honor," Sarah said, standing calmly. "With your permission, I would like to present a summary of our findings." She opened my binder and connected a small projector to her laptop. The wall behind the judge flickered to life. The first image was a simple, clean title: "Forensic Analysis of Miriam Clark's Accounts." Trevor's confident smirk began to falter. He had not been expecting a presentation. Sarah clicked to the next slide. It was a line graph, stark and devastatingly clear. One line, in blue, showed the steady, stable balance of Miriam's savings account for the past 5 years. The second line, in a sharp, angry red, showed the balance over the last 6 months, a plummeting, near-vertical drop from over $150,000 to just under $20,000. "As you can see, Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clinical, "the subject's life savings have been depleted by over 85% since her son was granted power of attorney." The next slide was the spreadsheet, my masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was a meticulously organized list of dates, transactions, and destinations, color-coded for clarity. The judge leaned forward, her eyes scanning the columns. Sarah used a laser pointer to highlight the most egregious items. "Here," she said, circling a $10,000 transfer, "we have funds moved directly to an account in Trevor Clark's name, noted as a loan repayment. Miriam Clark has never loaned her son money. Here is a $6,000 charge for a vacation to Cancun. Here is a $2,000 lease payment for a luxury automobile." With each new piece of evidence, Trevor's composure crumbled. His face went from tan to a pasty, sickly white. He was no longer a charming son. He was a thief, his crimes laid bare in the irrefutable language of numbers. The final slide was a pie chart, showing where the money had gone. Over 30% was lost in a high-risk brokerage account. Another 40% was spent on personal travel, retail, and automotive expenses. The rest was untraceable cash withdrawals. It was a perfect visual summary of his greed and incompetence. "Mr. Clark," the judge said, her voice now dangerously quiet, turning to my nephew, "is it your testimony that a $6,000 vacation to Mexico was a growth-oriented strategy for your mother as retirement fund?" Trevor was speechless. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, exposed and humiliated, the architect of his own ruin. The trap had been sprung. Judge Holloway's question hung in the silent courtroom, sharp and heavy as an executioner's axe. Trevor stood frozen, his charm and confidence stripped away, leaving only the pathetic figure of a common thief caught in the act. He looked from the damning pie chart on the wall to the judge's stony face, his mind clearly scrambling for an escape route where none existed. "Your Honor, the funds were." "It was a complicated transaction," he stammered, his voice a weak, desperate squeak. The judge was having none of it. She took off her glasses and leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with a look of utter contempt. "Mr. Clark, I have been a probate judge for 22 years, she said, her voice low and cutting. "I have seen garden-variety greed, I have seen breathtaking incompetence, and I have seen outright, malicious theft. What I see before me today, thanks to your uncle's meticulous work, is a rare and disgusting combination of all three." She turned her gaze to me and Sarah Jenkins. "Ms. Jenkins, your evidence is not just compelling, it is overwhelming." Then she turned back to Trevor, and the full force of her judicial authority came down on him like a landslide. "Trevor Clark, effective immediately, your power of attorney for Miriam Clark is revoked. You are to have no further contact with her finances or her health care decisions, pending a full criminal investigation, which I am recommending the district attorney's office initiate this afternoon." A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. This had moved beyond a family dispute and into the realm of a serious crime. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation, "I am granting an emergency and permanent guardianship to your uncle, Henry Clark. He has demonstrated not only a deep and genuine concern for his sister's well-being, but also the professional competence to protect her from predators, even when that predator is her own son." The climax was not a single moment, but a series of swift, brutal hammer blows. In the space of 5 minutes, Trevor was legally and publicly annihilated. He was stripped of his power, branded a thief, and set on a path toward a potential prison sentence. The man who had walked in expecting to charm his way out of a minor inconvenience was now facing complete and total ruin. The victory was absolute and definitive. Judge Holloway banged her gavel, the sound sealing my nephew's fate. "This hearing is concluded," she declared. As she swept out of the courtroom, Trevor finally collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. He was not a grieving son or a misunderstood financial wizard. He was just a defeated man, staring at the wreckage of a life he had destroyed with his own 2 hands. He had thought his mother's dementia was a weakness he could exploit, But he had failed to account for my strength, the strength of a lifetime spent in the quiet, patient pursuit of truth in numbers. Sarah and I gathered our papers. As we walked past the defense table, Trevor looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hatred. "Uncle Henry," he whispered, "how could you?" I paused for a moment and looked down at him, not with anger or with pity, but with the cold, detached finality of an auditor closing a case. "The numbers do not lie, Trevor," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving him to face the consequences he had so richly earned. The trap, which had been baited with his own greed and sprung by his own arrogance, was now empty. My sister was finally safe. That is how I got my so-sweet revenge. Leaving the courthouse that day, I felt not the elation of a victor, but the quiet, profound relief of an engineer who has just watched a dangerously unstable structure be safely and completely dismantled. The public humiliation of my nephew was a necessary consequence, but my true goal had been singular from the very beginning: to protect my sister. The life that followed the court hearing was one of methodical restoration, a careful rebuilding of the security that had been so maliciously torn away. As Miriam's legal guardian, my first act was to erect a series of impenetrable financial firewalls around her. I worked with Sarah Jenkins, and a court-appointed fiduciary, to move her remaining funds into a protected trust account. Every transaction now required multiple signatures and was subject to judicial oversight. Her money was no longer a tempting pool for a predator to fish in. It was a locked vault. With her finances finally secure, I was able to address her actual care. I found a place for her at a wonderful, highly rated memory care facility just a few miles from my home. It was not a palace like the ones Trevor might have chosen to impress people. It was a simple, single-story building surrounded by a beautiful, secure garden. The air inside smelled of fresh laundry and baked bread, not antiseptic in despair. The staff there knew the residents by name, not by room number. They made eye contact, they spoke in calm, gentle tones, and they treated my sister with a kindness that was both professional and deeply human. Miriam, in her moments of lucidity, understood that Trevor was no longer in her life, but she was blessedly unaware of the details of his betrayal. The fog of her dementia, which had made her so vulnerable, now served as a merciful shield, protecting her from the painful truth of what her son had become. She settled into her new home, and in the calm and secure environment, I saw peace return to her eyes that I had not seen in a very long time. The fear was gone. She was safe, and that was the only victory that truly mattered to me. The consequences for Trevor, however, continued to unfold with the cold, unforgiving logic of a legal proceeding. The civil lawsuit moved forward with incredible speed. With the probate judge's scathing ruling already on the record, his case was indefensible. The court placed immediate liens on all of his assets. The luxury car he had been leasing with Miriam's money was repossessed from the parking lot of his apartment building. His high-risk trading account was frozen and liquidated at a massive loss. He was forced to declare bankruptcy, his entire life of faux affluence and borrowed style collapsing into a mountain of debt and legal fees. He was compelled by the court to pay back a fraction of what he had stolen, but more importantly, his ability to financially harm anyone else was permanently neutralized. The district attorney's office, acting on the judge's recommendation, did indeed file criminal charges. Faced with my meticulous spreadsheet as the primary evidence against him, Trevor pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of felony financial elder abuse to avoid a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, and, in a moment of what I can only describe as poetic justice, 1,000 hours of mandatory community service at a state-run geriatric center. The man who had faked his devotion to his mother was now legally required to perform the acts of service he had so cruelly neglected. I never spoke to him again, and I never will. To me, he is a closed case, a bad debt that has been written off the books. My revenge was not in seeing him ruined, though there was a certain grim justice in it. My true and lasting satisfaction came from using my own life skills, the quiet, patient work of an accountant, to fulfill my most important family duty. I had spent my career holding strangers accountable for their deceptions, and in my retirement, I had been called to do it one last time for my own sister. I visit Miriam 3 times a week. We sit in the garden at her facility, and I read to her from the newspaper, or we listen to music from her youth. She often does not know my name, but she knows my presence. She knows that I am a kind and familiar man who brings her peace. She will smile and pat my hand, a gesture of simple human connection that is worth more than all the money her son had stolen. In those moments, I feel a profound sense of rightness. My nephew's life was a chaotic ledger of lies and theft. My life is one of order and quiet truth. He had sought to plunder a life savings to build a temporary false lifestyle for himself. I had simply sought to preserve a life of dignity for my sister. And in the final, balanced ledger of our family's story, that was the only entry that truly mattered. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me what part of the story you liked most.